Yeah, we met randomly online. My sister had found him on the Hinge app and said, "Why don't you just try someone different? Like you just keep choosing the same person over and over." So I went on a date with him, and I had just gotten heartbroken by another guy less than a month before, and in less than a year we fell in love, and like the rest is history. But it's
Oh,
it's pretty crazy what love does to you. But
yes.
I guess I'm curious for your story, Gina. Like, what was that like at 17?
Well, first of all, congratulations. I'm very
Thank you.
happy to hear this piece of news. It just warms my heart. Um,
Yeah.
how did I meet him at 17?
Well, what was it like at 17 to meet the man that did you know that you wanted to get married? Like, what was that like?
Yeah, that's a great question. I left home when I was 15, actually,
Okay.
to attend a United World College. I don't know if you know anything about United World Colleges. There are a number of different United World Colleges that promote peace and understanding. And so
Mm.
it's a scholarship-based program where you apply for this scholarship to attend a United World College, and there are many scattered around the world. And this one was particularly in Canada, and it was called Lester B. Pearson. And you live with 200 different people from all over the world for 2 years, and you complete an international baccalaureate exam. Sort of
Yeah.
that kind of culminates the service and the connections that you make with people. And so when I left at 15, I had a little bit more freedom than a normal sort of everyday 15-year-old would have. And so I had opportunities to kind of, you know, explore sort of the what we do call the romantic world as a 15-year-old, as a teenager. And I do remember so many times, and not like I dated a lot or had a lot of experiences, but there were moments where you liked somebody and
Yes.
your heart would get broken because it didn't work. I was just not mature. And I just remembered, I think after the third or fourth, not like I said, I'm talking very minimal like experiences, but enough to know that my heart had a wound and that I
Mm.
didn't like. And I just thought to myself before, so you finish this international baccalaureate and then you go to university. That was my pathway, anyways. And I said, the next person I meet, I just want to be friends with. I just want to know that this person will be a lifelong friend. And I remember distinctly being very conscious. It's like one of those moments in your life that you remember, like somebody was listening and I was present in my own body, making that conscious intention. And then I met Bob, and I still, still to this day go, how did that happen? And it was extremely, and it evolved that way. It took us four
Amazing.
months before we could actually decide that we were going to be a couple, and all the ways life navigates, even at that very young age. And so, and he was 21, but we were both in school. So, and it's been, yeah, it's 40 years now since we've known each other, and 35, coming on 35 in August.
I'm going to ask you the generic question that a lot of young people ask people that have been married for over three, almost 4 decades for the two of you. But what makes a marriage work? Like, I guess break it down. Like, what are some common misconceptions that people give advice about marriage as a
Hmm.
counselor that you often hear, and what are things that are actually the truth for you?
Yeah. Relationships, really, for me, like when I think about my husband and I, even before marriage,
Mm.
that's a great question because because I'm living it, it feels like you're just always at the very core. I think it's a deep respect for him as a human being. He's a good man. He's a good man. Um,
Mm.
and there's a consistency about
Mm.
him. Like I might be all over the place, you know, emotionally at moments, but he has been consistent. I think with his love. I think that's what
That's
it
so
is.
beautiful. You know, my pastor, when we were doing premarital, he said that men need respect, women need love, and when women don't have love, it's harder for them to respect. And when men don't have love, it's harder for them. When men don't have respect, it's
Respect.
harder for them to love.
Now that's so interesting that I had, yeah.
Yeah.
It's so interesting that you say that because it seems like it's a very true correlation of the way that I
Yeah.
see him. And,
Yeah.
and through that respect that I offer him or through the love that I offer him and respect, I receive that from him over and over and over again. Not so much always by, of course, we're demonstrative and we're loving and we're caring. I think that's really important too, is depending on your cultural upbringing and what felt right for you. Um, I do believe that just making moments to remember each other, like small moments. They don't have to be big moments like having children or getting married, or not that those aren't important rituals and ceremonies to have. It's the small holding, just holding his hand at moments where you're watching TV.
I love
Simple.
that feeling.
Yeah, it's you know
Yeah.
that. Yeah.
But our stories are very different, right? Because I met my person when I was in my late 20s, and you met Bob when you were 15,
17. Yeah.
17. Thank you for the correction. But like, it's interesting how our stories are very similar in that I was in a place of conscious knowing. I don't think I've ever shared this before,
No.
but
Oh.
my best friend had just had her first baby girl. And I remember holding her in my hands for the first time. And it was this electric moment that came over my body at, I think I think I had just turned 26. And it was very fast. It was like, oh, I think I'm ready for a lifelong commitment. And I think I want to start a life with someone. And it was that instant. And then 6 months later, my life had completely
Mm-hmm.
changed, and it's pretty funny how before that I was very focused on my career. I wanted to develop clinically. I was still working at Yellow Chair, and it's funny how like I could watch those old videos and my I could see different parts of my personality start to come alive where I feel a lot softer now. But I guess this is the perfect transition into just like understanding your nervous system and understanding your body, because the reason we met was because you were doing this training for Yellow Chair Collective, the private practice I work for, about polyvagal training, which is all about understanding the need for fundamental human relationships and the autonomic nervous system and how that's connected to the brain. But I kind of want to tackle this first and foremost from a personal level, Gina, of like, I know that you weren't always a clinical therapist.
I actually was a high school language teacher.
You know, what's funny? I always thought that language was its own form of art because I read through your life and you had had all of these different careers.
Yeah.
And I was like, there's an artistry to that, you know? I should have specified, but I think that the amount of just like patience, care, and respect that it takes to teach human language, I think
Oh,
requires a sense of adaptability, right?
yeah.
But I guess tell people about that. Like, what got you into teaching, what eventually led to the pivot into counseling, and how did you get to a place? I guess this is a more layered question. How did you get to a place where you started to become more attuned with yourself?
Yeah, thank you. Wow, it's a beautiful question and a beautiful reflection of how you saw the work that I do, because I often feel that when I'm working with clients or with human beings in general, um, it is an art form and it doesn't come from me. It is a
That's good.
gift. Yes, it is a gift. And also, I really need to start with my family, like with my parents and my ancestors. And I think you'll notice that when I began, even when I said hello to everybody, I wanted, like, I look at my parents because they're in my room right now, but I welcome them because without me, without you and I being here, it was our family, it was our parents that brought us into this world. That's a fact. It's a biological fact, and from that, however they were as parents, whatever they gave us life. And then,
Mm.
and then as I matured, I recognized this is the life that I have. And then
Mm.
and then I started to listen. I started to listen, and my father was a psychologist as well, and a teacher, and a human rights activist. So I feel like he has,
What an incredible man.
yeah, he was an incredible man. So I really feel, and my mother too was a teacher, and just a both of them were incredible parents, and really allowed us to have the gifts that we needed to do to shine in this world. So I really, and I have a beautiful family. I have 7 siblings, and many, who have passed on, who were, miscarriages or, yeah. So I also include them. I remember everyone. And so that is why this work is so important, even in the midst of what's happening in our communities and in our countries, in our families. We cannot exclude, because that's when dysfunction happens, and that's when the flow of love it has trouble, is thwarted. And so my work with Polyvagal, first of all, the work that I started as a teacher really began because of my parents, right? Because of their modeling. And then I was always very interested in counseling, always from a very young age. I'm sure you might have had that experience too, people talking to you, and you have this very open heart, Helen. So even when I
Oh,
walked
thank you.
in with all of the technology, you're just like, take your time, Gina. And then you just brought me in, and that's a gift.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's a true gift. And I know you've heard that many times, but
Thank you.
that's the energy of the gift that can be revealed through conversations like this. And so just, yeah, so in my experience with working with, you know having the influence of my parents, I went into teaching when I was actually in my 40s.
Mm.
I wasn't a teacher. I was working in coordinating language immersion programs for teachers, and then I had a family, and I started you know, I had children, and I was feeling like, oh, I need something else. So I did get a master's in education, without being a teacher at the time, and started really thinking, wow, I really, really love people. And so I had a French degree, and I was working on something called the Virtues Project, which is a
Mm.
beautiful program that brings the best out in kids. It's a character education program. And it's the way I raised my children with this language. Because, there's this experience of saying, oh, that's a good girl or a good boy. And that's what I would say to my dog, not to a human being, right? I would
Yeah.
look at qualities like excellence and respect and kindness and patience and and gentleness. And
Good.
I would ask them, I would bring those qualities out as I was raising them. And through that, I went, oh, I could do more with this work. How can I be useful? And it was
Yeah.
actually my husband, who you met today, who said, why don't you teach? Why don't you become a high school
Mm.
teacher or teacher? And I had the French because I had a psychology and French major. And so that was the track. And
Mm.
what was interesting, it wasn't so much the French, which I absolutely love teaching, and the Spanish and anything. It was the vehicle. Like, how do I bring the best out of kids? How do I show who I am in the world
Mm.
through some vehicle?
Mm.
And it was through the French language, through teaching, that you could teach qualities of humanness.
That's good.
And so I wanted to be that kind of a person, so that the nervous systems of these children, at the time that I did not know this language, could feel safe with me.
Mm.
Yeah, and so that was the teaching, and I don't
Wow.
think you can ever take that out. As you could see, I'm still doing it. So,
I love it.
yeah.
I love that there's still a thread of like fundamental love and care
Mm,
embedded throughout your whole life. Like you talk about the intention and the consciousness as to how you met Bob, and then the intention that it takes to raise a family and to just, you talk about me having an open heart, but I also say the same about you, Gina, of having the opportunity to just steward the lives of these children.
Mm-hmm.
Like I held back tears a few times just hearing your story because I've never heard of such a loving testament of just, people talk about doors opening, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where I think that the doors literally just opened for you.
Yeah.
And so I guess walk me through, given all of the nuanced experiences that you have, you didn't just go into a life as a clinical therapist.
Mm.
You did have a strong background in nurturing, in teaching. How does that carry into your practice as a clinician?
I think that's where this art form comes in. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
um, how does it carry through? I think it was just a natural segue. So I went from a teacher I taught for 10 years, and then I
yeah,
moved. So moving from a country to another country, and we've traveled a lot, we've lived in different places in the world, but moving from Canada to the United States was a huge move because we had two children at the time. And so we had to leave our older one behind, who was in her 20s, who was starting her nursing program. We invited her, "Do you want to come?" But she had her now husband at the time.
right.
So that was difficult. And then our little one had to kind of come with us without her sister. And
Mm,
it was heartbreaking, but there was something in the back of us that knew that this was the right move. But my husband
right.
got a job offer, and so we moved to Washington, D.C., or to the state of Maryland. And there was something about that transition that opened up all the doors of my counseling world. Yeah, and I remember my husband saying, "This is for me and the family, but I feel like um, something is going to happen for you. There's deep meaning there," which he
Your
was
husband
right.
sounds such an incredible person. The
Yeah.
fact that even in the midst of such a what sounds like a really stressful transition for the family, he was keeping you in mind. Are there similarities between Bob and your dad that you start to notice over time?
Not really.
Really?
It's so
Because
interesting.
they both sound like people who really care a lot, you know?
Yeah,
But
I see what you're
but go
saying.
ahead. Go
Yeah,
ahead. What were you going to say?
fundamentally, it's family. Like
Okay.
Bob is always very clear. Same with my dad. It was family first. I would do
Okay.
everything for my family, and that in itself, yes, those qualities. Um,
Okay.
but I think, like you have this beautiful childhood, but what I love is I extended those qualities of my father and added new ones with my husband.
Ooh, I like that because no one ever talks about this. That there's what I'm noticing is there's a fundamental curiosity to your personality. And so you really enjoy excitement and there's something new to see every single day. I love that. I think it's what keeps a relationship alive.
That's what we'll keep. And if you listen to Esther Perel, you've heard her.
Yeah.
She talks because she's been married for 30 plus years as well.
Yes.
And so I love that she does this work, but also works with those patterns of betrayal and infidelity, and why does that happen, and what are the expectations of us in a couplehood?
Right.
Who are we? So keeping very individual, being
Mm-hmm.
really clear of who you are, staying in
Mm-hmm.
your own lane, staying in your own body, and at the same time sharing core values in a collective way. Because people are watching all the time. And we're not doing it for those who are watching. But as parents, we were the models. No matter what I said to my children, they were watching. How are you truly living what you're saying, Mom? And
So true.
that's an art. That's the art of
Yeah.
living and being, in this body for the time that we have. So,
That's
um,
so good. That's
yeah.
so good. I guess, how do you stay in your body?
How do I stay in my body?
Yeah.
So, with that trajectory of the counseling world, why I became a counselor and how polyvagal works for me is
Yeah.
I the reason I got into to the counseling field when I moved from to the United States is because it was so profound. I had some time. So, do you
Mm.
mind if I backtrack so to give some
Please.
context?
Please, please, please.
So when we moved, I had time away from the responsibilities of being a teacher and calling parents and marking and all of the exceptional duties our teachers give to our
Yes.
children in the world.
So sacrificial.
It truly is. And so I remember going, wow, I have this time to just care for my husband and my two daughters, one far and one close, and just give them everything I can of myself because I'm a little bit free
Mm.
without those responsibilities. And I started to work for hospice. I wanted to volunteer for hospice because I've always wanted to work for them, and it was never the right time because you really need to be present for those who are in transition. And I really appreciated that time because it led me, as when we are conscious in our actions and in our decision making, when we're held in ventral, when we're making those particular pathways open and alive, I met.
Ventral vagal nervous system, for anyone that's curious about what Gina just said.
Yes, that's our social engagement system, the way that we can connect in the world. And
Yeah.
I met somebody who actually became one of my Reiki teachers. And I
Mm.
was always interested in energy work. And
So cool.
yeah, and she was just a delight to speak with, a dear friend of mine today, and introduced me to something called family constellations.
Ooh.
Yes, I don't know if you've heard of that
I've never heard of that. What is
modality.
family?
So
No.
that's where I got into the intergenerational work. So family constellations is another modality. It's sort of more on like experiential. The
Mm.
experience of working with family systems or
Mm.
organizations, any kind of systems where there is a dysfunction or there is a decrease in the flow of love. So what this work does is it increases the flow of love by looking at the invisible patterns that exist in those patterns in any system. In my case, it was with families. So I wouldn't work particularly with the family as a therapist. I would work
Mm.
just with the individual to sort of navigate what are the patterns that are happening intergenerationally with your family, because that's going to impact your nervous system in the way that you respond to each family member or to a cousin or to a relative, to a sister-in-law. Something's happening that we can't see, that's not visible. So I had a beautiful teacher, and I still have her. Her name is Francesca Mason Boring, and she was my teacher.
It's beautiful.
And she was a Shoshone tribe, indigenous woman. So we, really connected. And then my friend Ronnie, that
Love that.
combination just opened up the door. So from that connection, in constellations work, and you'll know maybe in even different psychological um, modalities, like, or different places, there's often very many white people. We're often in very
Yes.
many white spaces. Even the word
Yes.
psychology is a psyche, does not always include the brain, right?
Correct.
So there's whole liberation, like, decolonized liberation or decolonized
Love
psychology is so
this.
important.
Mm.
And so we decided, not we, I was invited to join this Women of Color sort of book club, who are all
Mm.
family constellators, who are all working with different white spaces, but wanted to come together as women of color.
Mm.
So this was in the States, and somebody recommended the book My Grandmother's Hands. Have you read that book?
My
Yeah.
I have not read
Mm-hmm.
the book, but I've been strongly impacted by the book
Mm-hmm.
because my supervisor at Yellow Chair Collective, Feng Tang, read it,
Ah,
and has, I don't know if you've met Feng.
no, I haven't.
She is usually working in the office on Mondays, so that's probably why you haven't had a chance to meet her in the training. But she references that book often, or
Okay.
had,
Yeah.
when I was still an associate before I turned into a licensed clinician, but that book I just keep hearing in my mind. So I have to remember to actually read it for myself. But continue. How did that book impact you?
Well, in that book, Resma, he's an African American psychotherapist, working with healing racialized trauma. And at that point, I was just kind of like just delving into my sort of, I had worked with race and all of that, and oppression and marginalization, all those conceptual experiences in my own body from day one, right? Since birth, as we know. But he kind of talked about the vagus nerve
Yeah.
in his book, but he called it the soul nerve. And I
Ooh,
loved that. And anytime I
I
hear the word
like that.
soul or soul wound or something, like, I'm like, what does that mean? And it doesn't trigger me. And it just kind of awakens something in me. So I read that part of his book, and I read lots of sections of his book, of course, but that one particularly kind of resonated. And I went, what is this vagus nerve? So then, of course, as we all do, we go to Google at that time, and I started researching, and I came across Dr. Porges's work, and I think I shared this with you in the presentation, that his work is, now I understand it, but at the beginning, when I'm just learning about this incredible nerve in our body, I did not understand the way that he was sort of speaking about it. But Deb Dana, who is a clinical social worker and as
Yes.
an author, really took that work with Dr. Porges and applied it and wrote about it in a very palatable way that all curious human beings could understand. And of course, she focused a little bit on clinicians at the time when she was writing her first book, Polyvagal Theory and Therapy. So then I just got so interested.
Ew.
I went, wow, what is this vagus nerve? And how the way she laid it out was so interesting. So I took the course. I took the 6-month training, foundational training.
Yes.
And then
Yes.
after that, I became a consultant. And then I became a senior trainer. And then I was, doing something more with that. But I realized that there wasn't a polyvagal training for communities of color.
Asian Americans.
Yes.
It's good.
Yes. For Asian Americans, for Asian Canadians. And I just felt, and it was a bold request to
Love
ask
that.
Deb, is there a possibility of something being formed? Can I be part of this collective healing and collective learning? And that's when PVT-TEA was born, and I'm doing it with another
So
co-facilitator.
cool.
It was very beautiful. So to answer that question, how do you embody
Yeah.
all of life, basically, that was an entrance way into learning about polyvagal theory and our nervous system, which is unique to all mammals. So regardless of your socioeconomic status, your ethnicity, your education, your ableism, all of those, right, your gender, we all start with the nervous system. So people can understand that. They have a body. They can, that's the way in. It's like a little invitation to sort of, are you interested in your own unique nervous system? First,
That's good.
and then you'll start to understand others, but it's so much more easier to start with your own because you have that much more agency, right? And so then I took that information and I was really loving it. But I'm also, and I hear that you are too, there is a strong spiritual component
Yes.
to who you are as a human being and the way that you carry yourself in the world with a
Yeah.
trust and a grace, right? Like I feel that from you. And so I was introduced by the supervisor I was with, who was helping me to counsel during my practicums with this new degree that I was receiving, as in counseling psychology. And at her agency at the time was working with a program called the Realization Process. I think I talked about that in my website as well. And Judith Blackstone sort of introduced this beautiful body of work through a whole series of embodied practices of how to live inside the body, and through that, psychological healing and spiritual awakening could arise. And that was so interesting to me because I understood a lot of somatic work from
Yeah.
the nervous system, but she took that into a place about trauma with using the fascia, which is this collective protein matrix and collagen that actually surrounds every living cell, every living organ in the body. So anything that is ruptured or anything that you know, sort of like if you move something, everything else ripples. And then I went, oh, that's where trauma lives too. Trauma lives in our bodies.
Yes.
And as an Asian woman, I did not connect that because I didn't want to live in my body.
I have so much to say,
Yeah,
but I
please.
just love hearing you talk about this because as a therapist that's worked primarily with Asian Americans for the last 5 years, the last 5 years politically in the United States has brought about so much mental and spiritual turmoil for so many individuals that I work with that I've searched night and day for a modality that I can specialize in. And to your point about the whole spiritual component, I was relying on faith that eventually it would come. And the moment that I logged on to your training on that Monday afternoon, it was kind of like a beautiful wave that just hit me of this is what I've been looking for. Something that allows a lot of the women I work with actually have PTSD from the racialized trauma that they've experienced, the otherness, the body image issues, all of these I started to hypothesize were symptoms of a greater issue that I didn't have language for. And now I'm realizing that it's fundamental disconnectedness from who we are as human beings
Yes.
because we don't know who we are. We're primed to think about everyone else except for us. And so the teachings that you've acquired over these last few years, I'm so thankful for, and I feel a huge level of gratitude that you've paved the way for women like me to begin to learn more about herself. Just like really leaning into the learning. And I love the part that you brought out about the spiritual awakening. I still would love to learn more about those things, and I hope that the people listening can learn more as well. So I'll try to put that in the link. But can you talk more about like the spiritual disconnect that us Asians don't really attune to? Like, because I think that was the missing piece about learning about polyvagal. It's okay, now what? There
Yeah.
is this understanding that trauma disconnects us and human relationships are fundamental for growth and becoming attuned with thyself. But there is this synchronicity that I've experienced in my life. Just in the last 2 weeks, for example, meeting you, scheduling a podcast interview, getting certified in polyvagal, trying to understand what spiritual and relational healing means. But what is spiritual awakening, Gina, as you know it now? Yeah.
Oh, so beautiful.
Yeah.
And I'm so grateful that you are really tuning into your own spiritual vessel. Like
Thank
you're
you.
really listening. And that is the intention. Like when you met your partner, like there's something
Yes.
that's supporting you. And I think
Yes.
that is what, when you talk about spiritual awakening and
Yeah.
why we've left our bodies, spiritual awakening isn't a thing, you
It's
know?
not a moment.
No, it is just, it is. It's always there. Like it is always, it's there. It's just being uncovered. Right. And you're seeing it and you'll notice it in moments and glimpses. We can do that in moments of awe, but to make it like if to make it palatable for people to understand, because this is sort of where we've gone in our
Yes.
heads, in our mind, and we'll start it because this really is a body, brain, whole experience and a spiritual one as well. But if I break it down, the reason I use polyvagal theory and the nervous system as a portal, as an entranceway, as a doorway into understanding who we are as human beings, because all of this is going through our lived experiences. We have a nervous system, and it can be as young as when you're born. If you have memories of as little as when you're 2 or 3 or 4 of something happening, there was an awareness
Yeah.
there,
Yes.
right? If everything is
Yes.
working, if everything, but
Yes.
but what worked for me, and for those people who are listening and wondering what does ventral vagal mean.
Mm.
So the polyvagal theory is really a neurobiological framework that helps us to understand, or gives us an understanding of why we think, why we behave, why we feel at any given moment. Just helps us to know that when I'm depressed, there's a reason. When
Yeah.
I'm anxious, there's a reason, and when I'm connected, there's a reason, and not in the sense of like in a judgmental way. It's we have these states for protection, right? When we
Yes.
are depressed, there's usually something within our nervous system is telling us, I don't have energy right now to deal with a certain situation. I'm overwhelmed. So that part of my state is going to take care of me, and I'm going to disconnect or shut down. Or if something is triggering that I feel like I need to fight or defend myself or flee from something, it's because something doesn't feel safe. And then when there's moments of safety and I can feel a little bit of safety, relative safety, maybe I can come up for air and connect with another human being or another mammal, or connect with nature, or connect with myself. So that I'm giving sort of just a sort of a brief look into sort of the hierarchy of one of the principles of polyvagal theory.
Yes.
But what really struck me when it came to working with polyvagal theory is what Deb Dana, who is just an inspiring human being of this work, along with Dr. Porges, she had said that with being in ventral, with this connective part of our evolutionary part of our biology, what opens up is the ability and the capacity to connect not only with our bodies, to the self, to the external situation in the world, with other nervous systems like what you and I are having at this moment, but also connect with spirit. Whatever that means to you, whether or not whatever you're doing gives you meaning and purpose, or if you feel like you have a sense of the divinity within you or something higher that works through us and with us, right? When I heard that, because everything seems so solid, the nervous system is the body. When she said spirit, I went, oh, because I knew, you know? And then I took that as a way to sort of like, again, in the way that I went into teaching, as myself as the vessel through which I can serve in a different way. And so through that and through my counseling program, I found Judith Blackstone's work. And Judith Blackstone is also a psychotherapist, actually, in New York, and really was gifted with these series of embodied exercises through her own experience as a dancer. And much of her work is based on Asian precepts and Asian sort of philosophies. And so I really connected with that, sort of both the Buddhist and the Hindus. And I went, wow, this work is resonating with me, because she's teaching you how to live inside your body. And as I don't know if it was your experience, but I think I had shared this in our presentation. For 20 years, I did not want to be Asian.
You did say that, yes.
Didn't know what it was like. All my models were white women. Can you imagine?
Correct.
Just having to live with this psyche or this psychology that
That is
I
so
am less
true.
than because I don't look like somebody who I'm never, ever going to look like. and how damaging that was for me.
We can spend another hour
Well,
just on
I listened to, when I was reading sort of Where I Belong, with Sujin
yes.
and Linda's book, and I'm thinking of the stories and the narratives of so many that say how they never
Oh,
fit in. And that's where the polyvagal comes in, because those were all protective states, fitting in, people
mm,
pleasing, trying to be perfect.
mm.
Coming into a country like many of us were first generations, where you just can't ever.
Ever change or belong because I can't change the fundamental human makeup of my body. And so it's easier for me to just check out and act like I'm not Asian or not Filipino. But yeah, I immigrated here when I was 5. It was November
Mm,
2002.
okay.
And I remember holding my mom's hand going into elementary school. And my mom was registering me as a student, and they put me a grade behind because I was smaller than the
Yeah.
other kids. And I remember I had no problem with that, but I was just a curious kid. I was looking around at the administrators, the teachers. Everyone was white. And I remember my kindergarten teacher, Miss Yasuda, she was the only Japanese teacher, and I remember holding on to her and I didn't understand why. I was
Yeah.
like, I'm so attached to this teacher. And I have so many distinct memories looking around my playground trying to find another Asian kid. Because when you grow up in a Filipino environment, everything is the same. So you never think about, there was so much privilege I remember not knowing about, of living in an environment where everyone was the same. Because you never think about being judged or being different. You're allowed to be expressive. And so to immigrate to one country to another was like this feeling of otherness. I don't know, I don't fit into the clothes that everyone else fits in. Everyone's 5'6", 5'7". I remember I stayed 5'2" for my, like after the 8th grade, right? And I think that every Asian woman has a story like this, where chemically altering some part of yourself or wanting to, or over exercise, the things that you think that are going to give the immediate hit of belonging, but that's not really the issue. And so it's yeah, I share that with you, Gina.
Thank
It's
you.
just incredible to hear you just embrace yourself.
Mm,
Even as the starting clinician, I wanted to do that.
mm-hmm.
And it wasn't until I started working for Yellow Chair that I began to do the work. I don't know if I've shared this either, but it was my first week working at Yellow Chair, and Sujin had noticed that I had this compulsion to overwork. She immediately noticed
Yeah.
that. But she said it in such a beautiful
Yeah.
way to me that wasn't aggressive or
Mm-hmm.
commanding, but it was healing.
Mm.
And she has a very profound healing
She does.
frequency. Just by being around
Yeah.
her, you feel like you can just
Yeah.
breathe,
Yeah.
right? So I was in this Google Meet meeting with her, and she said, Helen, as Asian women, we're taught to bend over backwards or to be more hardworking than others to prove our worth. But you work for an Asian American company that tries to understand how these different systems affect a human being. And she said, you don't have to do that here. You can rest and you're allowed to take breaks.
What a
And
gift.
she said that just in that same way. And it stuck in my brain of, it didn't change immediately, but it was an opportunity to begin the healing
Mm-hmm.
process.
Mm-hmm.
But
That's beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. That just is such an invitation to radically rest,
yes,
not only personally, but collectively.
yeah, but it's also, even saying that out loud, it's wild to me that rest has to be radical,
Mm-hmm. I know.
that it just can't be a birthright, right? So I think the work that we just talked about, I think is so necessary
Yeah.
for women like me. Because I think I love what you
Yeah.
said of understanding our nervous system starts with us, and it's being able to belong in us before it ever belongs in someone else, right?
Absolutely. As
Yeah,
you know, as a therapist, you can only take your clients to the places
as
that you
far.
feel that you have been able to. And so we're always
That's
going to
good.
have our teachers. I'm currently going to go and take an advanced training for family constellations to work with larger collective fields from my teacher, who I know holds collective fields in a most graceful way. And I think we're always moving towards those opportunities where we can, you just know this is the person. This is the person who I'm ready for, you know, who will teach
That's
me and
good.
walk with me. And
Mm,
so, and Sujin was that woman for you to be able to say, you can put everything down, that strain and that struggle and that push, right? We can let that be. It'll always be there if you want it,
yeah, yeah.
right? And just you noticing that you could put it down gave you permission to breathe. Like
Yes,
just that alone. Yeah.
that's so good.
Yeah.
Yeah,
What a
that lesson
gift.
took me 2.5 years to learn. Yeah. So, and
Yeah.
I've been with the company for 2.5 years, which is the patience and the love that they gave me throughout the.
Oh no, but I think your natural gift was to introduce so many different people through your podcasts of
Mm,
ways of living and being in
thank
their own
you.
bodies. I have to say, because when I had heard about Yellow Chair before reading the book,
Yeah.
and I remember listening to your podcasts and
Oh,
going, wow, she's an exceptional human being. This is somebody that I would really love to, to have a
thank you.
conversation with. And here we are today.
Here we are. First guest on
Yeah.
my
Oh,
podcast, my
thank you.
first personal project in over 2.5 years.
Oh,
So,
well, this is a lovely way then to kind
yeah.
of like celebrate.
Thank you, Gina.
I feel that way for me as well, because getting this work out in the world, I've been pondering like, who am I supposed to be working for? We have Resma and we have Ken Hardy, who work with a lot of Black therapists, and I'm like,
Yes.
and we have Linda Tai. I don't know if you've heard
Hmm.
of her. She's also
No.
doing a lot of some sort of somatic work. She's an Asian woman and
Mm,
works with a lot of immigrants, and just finding your place in the world, right?
mm,
And I think with you doing these podcasts, you're introducing so many to the world with this work. It's a real gift. It's a real gift. So I
thank
appreciate
you.
you taking that time with me too to share my story and you know
Likewise,
however it might
Gina.
help. Um,
Likewise.
yeah,
Yeah. I
yeah.
appreciate you. I wish we had more
Likewise.
time. I'd love to have you on for a second installment because I feel like we have so much left to talk about. But
Yes, yeah.
when you come back from your vacations, we'll schedule something.
Let's schedule another thing. Was there anything else just to kind of tie in sort of our
Yeah, so
conversation?
I think that the fundamental thing that has always crossed my mind was a lot of Asian women, to your point, don't feel like they belong in their bodies. So I just want to give people an action step after they're done listening to this interview. Because the feedback I always receive is like, the amount of information that you're providing is great, but I want something to do after. And so for women that are just now listening to this who want to start doing the work of healing, doesn't
Yeah.
have to be a woman. For those men or non-binary folks listening
Yes.
to this, but what are some practices that they can begin to do today before we end our call?
So the way I work, so if you were a client of mine and you came in with some sort of presenting problem as we talk, you know, as we
Hmm.
share, it's usually just something that they're grappling with. I would probably introduce them to the nervous system. That would be my first step. This is, you know, I have something called the Gina
Mm,
method, right? Which is sort of G with grounded in
yeah.
spiritual and science, but also have a look at your nervous system. First, ask yourself, what am I feeling? What am I feeling? And so, if I took that one step, you know, if we're working with polyvagal theory, what state am I in? So I think, there was a slide that I shared with you about it's not so much the event that's important. That's important, but there's lots of research now being done that the event isn't what the most important thing is to look at. It's how we respond to life and that event. So we can either go into a pathway of protection or a pathway of connection, depending on what's going on. So for many people, probably in the United States, for communities of color, or in an Asian body, we may be going, I might ask you, what pathway do you feel like you're going through with what's happening politically at this moment? And I know this is getting into a big question, but
No, I love this question. It's definitely protection.
definitely protection, and rightly so. There is a neuroception, which is Dr. Porges' way of saying something that you're feeling in your body is signaling that something is dangerous. And so that's a match. We don't know what's going to be happening. It's affecting the world. It's affecting the United States, particularly affecting you at this moment as we're speaking. And so you're going into a protective mode. And that protective state can be either sympathetic, which is your fight or flight.
Yes.
Or your dorsal, which is your freeze, disconnection. And so from that place, we have a series of beliefs and thoughts, feelings and behaviors. And if we're coming from a state where we feel like we're afraid or anxious or even depressed, those are triggers that are not us. They're there in service of our survival. And that's where we get mixed up. Because anything from those particular experiences, that's protective states, we're going to act on those. We're going to feel those. And our actions are going to be influenced by that.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yes.
So if I'm afraid, I'm going to tell you I'm afraid, but it's going to come from that place of fear, which is always outside of us. We have left our bodies. But the awareness of knowing I am really scared interrupts the pattern. Just ever so slightly to go, oh, is this true? Like why? What's the context of why I'm feeling afraid? And that's important. And then you can you start to move. You start to kind of interrupt it. You're not so hijacked by it. Because that is the moment when you can begin healing, provided you have other co-regulating presences or a self that feels in tune with itself. Wow. Does that make sense?
That's good. That's good.
Yeah. And then if you are in a connected place, then those beliefs and behaviors and feelings are going to reflect a different kind of response.
Love that.
So just as you're listening, what's happening for you, as you're noticing, yeah, there's a lot going on in my country right now. And if I'm wanting to help my Asian American clients, how do I do that? Is that...
I follow. Yeah. So what I'm hearing you say is if we don't say the feeling out loud, the fear puts us outside of our bodies. And so the very act of naming the emotion actually gives us power back and helps reconnect us to ourselves.
You come back in a very embodied, whole place.
Okay.
Because I think the important thing to remember, and as your listeners and your viewers, is that you are already whole. You are not defective, as Resma would say. These are all protective.
Yeah.
These are protective strategies in service of our survival. They help us to keep us alive. But that's not enough. Like, I've had it, like that's where the rage and the anger comes out, and you start to take agency for your own anger because you begin to see the history of your people. You begin to see and understand the intergenerational pieces of your trauma, what your parents did to come into this country, what your mother and father did to introduce you to a new school, and pray with all their hearts that you were going to be okay. Because this was a different experience, and they were coming from their own sympathetic, probably activated survival strategy of please, So I love how your faith is so strong, and how it guides you in your life, because there's truth to that. There's something and then it lives behind us, in front of us, and all around us.
That's good.
And
That's
you
so
can,
true.
so that's just one way, Helen, that I would just
Yeah.
introduce. Do you want another way?
You have to
No, I
go.
don't have to go. I just have a dentist
Okay.
appointment. That can wait. I'm happy to be out of my body for that one. Just kidding. But
Love the honesty.
because I don't like the dentist. But
I
anyways,
I've
that's
learned to
funny.
like the
Yeah.
dentist, but the dentist I have now I don't really like.
So you
So
have
I
to
feel
change.
you. I really do
Yeah.
understand.
And I like mine, but I still don't like the dentist. But again, I think that's from when I was very little and we had students, because we didn't have a lot of money, right?
Oh
So you
my
had your student.
goodness.
My mom would go, well, if you didn't have a medical plan or if you didn't have a very good medical plan, then students who were in dental school would just fool around with your teeth and you're like, oh, that hurts,
Oh my
so
gosh.
I think that's all. I mean, but that's a good experience to know, like, what is true? What is the
Yes.
trigger a
Love that.
match? Or is it something that's happened into the past? That's another strategy to ask
Mm,
yourself, right? When you're in the
yeah.
moment, I'm really angry at this person. Is that person giving me that activation because they truly are dangerous? Or is it just because somebody said something like that before in the past to me, or they remind me of something in the past? And I'm bringing that to the forefront. And that's usually what happens with trauma victims, is that if you haven't healed a piece of your soul or yourself, then that pain is going to get blown over to the situation or to that human being, and you mistake
Mm,
it,
mm.
for really what is happening as in the suchness of that moment, that it could just be not true.
That's good.
So it's just
Perceived
something,
threats.
yeah. So you just,
Yeah.
exactly. So, but the other piece that I wanted to share is the work that I do. If people wanted to go and look into to Judith's work as well, not only the polyvagal theory, but it's called the realization process. And really, what that has helped me is through these series of embodied, sort of very subtle, precise, gentle practices, you really learn how to uncover the deepest dimension of who you are in your authenticity. There's a wholeness that is already there. And from the wholeness, when you're sitting back in your own body, you can actually see the landscape of trauma,
Mm,
but without being shattered by it.
mm,
So you don't take that
mm.
as your identity. It's not that it's not real. It's not that it's not happened. We don't negate any part of our existence. In fact, we reclaim it.
Mm.
We come into our bodies, we feel whole, and then we can do this incredible work with our clients because they can breathe even while they're looking at the suffering.
That's good.
Yeah. So that, but I would love to do a group sort of meditation process. Like, I love embodied meditation. I love teaching this work to the world. So,
I love learning from you, Gina. You really are very gifted in what you do because I feel so healed and seen by this conversation. I feel like every room you go into when you teach, just from my personal experience, you embody that.
oh, thank you.
And in ending this call, I want to provide gratitude because I hope that this touches a 15, 16, 18-year-old girl who feels like she's outside of her body and there's no example of what that looks like nowadays. And the fact that we have an opportunity in this day and age to put out media content that speaks to those people. I'm so grateful for the work that you continue to
Oh,
do.
thank you.
Seriously, because
Oh,
it's
well,
helping me, and I hope it helps someone in their healing journey too. So I'm
yeah.
sure it will. I know
Oh,
it will.
thank you. And it was
Yeah.
such a sweet visit with you, Helen. I feel like you could be in my in my house having some tea and
I
having
would
some
love
good
that.
food. Yes, you're always welcome to come to Canada. Have you been? Have you been to
I've
Canada?
I've been to Canada one time. I did a service trip. I used to work with Young Life. I don't know if you've
Oh,
heard of.
I
There's an island off of. I don't know if Toronto is on the east coast.
yes.
Vancouver's on the west
Yes.
coast,
So I
right?
live
So
very close to. So you're talking Victoria or,
No, I went to Vancouver, not
oh,
Toronto.
Vancouver,
So
the mainland.
I
Yeah.
drove up from Seattle to Vancouver, and then I took a boat to a small island called Malibu Island, and
In,
in
in
Canada.
Canada.
Yeah, and
Oh,
I lived there for about a week. There was no Wi-Fi, and it was such a beautiful experience to see the Canadian mountains, the ocean.
yeah.
It's just so
It's
serene.
beautiful.
There's such a peace. I felt such a peace when I was up there. But
Oh,
yeah, if I'm ever in Canada, I'll come
oh,
visit.
please come
Yeah,
and visit. Yeah, I would
yeah.
love to have you in my home. Yeah,
Thank
it would
you.
be a real gift. Yeah.
The
And
feeling's mutual.
I will definitely, you know, look you up and connect with you when we come to LA again.
Please
Yeah, I would
do.
love
I
that.
would love
Yeah.
that too.
And thank you, Helen, for
Mm,
this beautiful gift of being with you. It really was a
mm.
very beautiful way to welcome my Friday. Truly, truly. It's just
Oh, likewise.
you have a way of being with people that I hope will continue to do this for the rest of your life in whatever
I want
capacity.
to.
Yes. Yeah.
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 Thank you.
And I look forward to
Oh,
connecting again.
likewise.